Hello, Fieldswell family. I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Adam Sudd. Adam is a behavioral wellness and nutrition expert, international speaker, and the founder and CEO of Plant Based for Positive Change, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing research and understanding how nutrition impacts mental health and addiction. Adam, welcome to the Fieldswell podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. It's funny because I know we were supposed to do this conversation like a month or so ago, but I had a scheduling conflict that came up last minute. And I remember writing the email like, gosh, I hope this means I still get to have an opportunity to do this interview because I'm really excited to talk to you.
Oh, so kind. I've been looking forward
Yeah.
to it as well. I'm so fascinated by your research on nutrition, and I can't wait to dive in and provide some value for our listeners. And I'm going to
Yeah.
tee it off with this question, Adam.
Mhm.
Have you always been interested in wellness and nutrition?
Yeah, no, not at all. So it's funny that I am now such a passionate um, uh, individual in regards to understanding nutrition research and the value that it has to offer people in various aspects of life. But I was the furthest thing from this person literally 12 years ago today.
Today?
So today.
Wow.
So today I have 12 years of continuous active recovery. Um, and so my story started actually on August 21st of 2012.
Okay.
On August 21st of 2012, I hit my rock bottom. I had grown up in the 80s and 90s in Texas, and I fell victim to all of the cultural biases of being a Texan, eating meat every single day. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so it was the greatest era of unregulated junk food that's ever existed. And I suffered from very intense bullying in high school.
Okay.
The bullying was so bad, in fact, that halfway through my freshman year of high school, they had the assistant principals would have to get their eyes on me when I got dropped off at school, so they could make sure that I made it into the school safely. Um, and I had, all the kinds of insecurities that occur just from being, alive.
Mhm.
And I had been convinced that every single day of my life it was a very unsafe,
Mhm.
insecure, and hopeless place to be.
Mhm.
And I found a solution to that experience of being alive by uh, taking prescription pills. I got
Okay.
addicted to Adderall and stimulants very early on in my life,
Mhm.
about sophomore year of high school. And it was an amazing, unbelievable solution for me. Until obviously the traditional trajectory of drug use and substance use for me became substance abuse, and then substance abuse became substance abuse disorder. By
Mhm.
the time I was 30 years old,
Mhm.
I was broke. I was over 300 pounds. I had undiagnosed diabetes and heart disease. I had a whole bunch of psychological issues going on, overly depressed, overly anxious, overly lonely.
Yeah.
And on August 21st, of 2012, I tried to end my life.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember surviving the intentional drug overdose.
Uh-huh.
And I'd been struggling with substance use disorder for about 10 or so years at that point. So I had definitely experienced minor overdoses or overdoses before. And I can remember this one feeling distinctly different. It was a
Yeah.
really interesting experience as it started to take effect.
Mhm.
And I remember trying to stand up, and then I remember everything going black. And I can remember falling forward, and that's the last thing I remember. Um, what I also remember is what I felt in that moment. I remember the physical experience of it. It was very painful.
Yeah.
Felt like I got stabbed in the right side with a hot knife. My body cramped. But that's not the feeling I'm talking about. I'm talking about the feeling that I was going to experience the last moment of my life,
Mhm.
and I was completely alone,
Mhm.
disconnected from every loving and meaningful bond in life that ever gave me the sense that life was something I wanted to be a part of. And I don't know what it feels like to die.
Yeah.
But I do know what it feels like to believe that you're dying with a life full of regret.
Mm.
And that is worth your fear.
Mm.
And so I got up off of I survived it. I had medical attention, and
Yeah.
realized in that moment that if I wasn't willing to go this direction instead of that direction,
Uh-huh.
it's over.
Yeah.
And not just the hard parts, everything. Everything that in that moment where I thought it was over, that I was asking the universe for one more second of,
Mm.
all of that is gone. So
Mhm.
I took the bravest step I've ever taken in my life. I called my parents, I asked for help.
Yeah.
And 12 years ago today, I walked into the doors of rehab.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank
12
you.
years. Yeah.
12 years. And that's where I got diagnosed with advanced type 2 diabetes, advanced coronary artery. So I had high cholesterol, I had high blood pressure. In fact, my blood pressure was 210 over 100 over 120 when I checked into rehab. Uh, they diagnosed me with a whole host of psychological conditions,
Yeah.
and they wanted to put me on a cabinet's worth of medication for life.
And so it goes. And often you believe you need to trust the doctor, but I know you took a
Yeah.
different approach.
Yeah, I remember listening to the doctor tell me about all the medications that I needed to take. And after the doctor went through this list of medications and why I needed to take them, he looked at me and he said, I want you to understand the trajectory of your future. You're more than likely going to have a cardiac event in the next 5 to 10 years. You are a class, you're classified as class 3 obese. This is likely very much genetically driven. There's not much you can do about it. You're likely always going to be overweight or obese. You're always going to have heart disease. There's nothing you can do about it. We're going to medicate you for it. Your A1C is a 12. So an A1C is a biomarker for diabetes. And so a healthy individual is anyone with an A1C below 5.7%. 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetic. Anything over 6.4% is considered type 2. Mine was a 12. Is we're going to put you on the highest dose of oral diabetic medication that we can give you. This is likely not going to solve the problem. You're likely going to be on insulin, and you're at risk for amputation, blindness, loss of hearing.
Wow.
But Adam, if you want your life to get better, you have to stop using drugs. And when I heard the doctor say that, I thought to myself, that might have been the worst advice I'd ever received. This doctor wrote out a future for me
Mm-hmm.
that was far more terrifying than anything I had ever imagined in my life.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't anything I was excited to be a part of. It was something I was actually quite terrified to be
Mm-hmm.
a part of. So, if anything, I should double down on my use. What urgency now should I have to
Right.
try to do anything for myself if this is my fate, if I'm headed in that direction?
He didn't paint a very bright picture for the future.
He didn't. Thankfully, I stumbled across the work of a very, very dear friend of mine now, a man named Rip Esselstyn.
Mhm.
Rip Esselstyn is the author and founder of Plant Strong. He's also an executive producer of the film The Game Changers. He talks about the benefits of plant-based nutrition.
Mhm.
And I had gone to an event of his that my dad had dragged me to about a year before my attempt. And I remember thinking, this is the dumbest thing ever. Like, I don't care. I'm just here because my dad wanted me to go. And I just want to make my dad happy so I can ask him for money afterwards.
Right.
It's the only reason I'm here.
Right.
But my goodness, I remember, and I was like, hang on a second. At that event that I went to with Rip, there were luminary thought leaders and doctors that told a very, very different story.
Mm-hmm.
They told me a story that suggested that if I was to accurately and appropriately reorganize my caloric environment,
Mm-hmm.
I could take charge of my health. I could create a future that felt safe, secure, and hopeful. Essentially, if I could do this well, I had the opportunity to reverse engineer aliveness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I wanted to do. And I incorporated plant-based nutrition into my recovery program. Within 5 months, reversed my diabetes and my heart disease.
Wow.
Within 10 months, I lost over 100 pounds, and I got off of all of
Wow.
my medications, my psych
Yeah.
meds and everything within 1 year.
That timeline is insane. It's incredible.
It sounds incredible, but
Yeah.
what's fascinating is now that I've, on the other side of it, and I went back to school and studied nutrition, started working in the clinical setting,
Yeah.
and really wanted to focus on helping people understand what is this thing that we call insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I really wanted to figure out, because when I was diabetic, they kept saying this term, insulin resistance.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to understand it. And what it turns out, what is actually taking place is that insulin resistance is a metabolic state that drives most of the chronic health conditions that people suffer from, whether it's cardiovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, fatty liver disease. It contributes to certain cancers. It certainly contributes to obesity, high
Yeah.
blood pressure, and it certainly contributes to dementia and Alzheimer's. I was like, man, if I could reverse insulin resistance, if I could become insulin sensitive, I solve all those problems. I want to understand that.
Yeah.
And as a result of being really radical and fanatical about that, I got the opportunity to work with amazing organizations to help people reverse insulin resistance. But my whole heart, the whole time, was like, how do I determine whether or not my diet played a role in my
Right.
radical recovery from mental health and addiction struggles?
Right.
Because I remember I walked into rehab, I was the sickest, most disconnected, most anxious and depressed and angry person I'd ever been in my entire life. And within less than 1 year, I left the healthiest, most excited about being present in my life that I had ever been. And I witnessed, because I was in a rehab hospital for 37 days and a sober living for 10 months.
Okay.
So I went through 11 months of recovery with essentially the same people. And I
Yeah.
witnessed the recovery that was occurring around me. And while everyone was actively staying sober, they were in a rehab hospital or in a sober living facility, so it was guarded, you couldn't really use. I noticed a lot of people were getting through their days sober. Their medications weren't going anywhere. The dosages were getting higher, perhaps adding additional medications. Their health was deteriorating because they had replaced use with other things that were not valuable for long-term outcomes. So this is really interesting. I lived in the same house as these people. We did the same program. My caloric environment looked vastly different from theirs. Did that variable have a role in the radical shift that I experienced compared to the others? And I looked into the research, and there wasn't a single study,
Wow.
not one single controlled trial investigating the effects of nutrition on addiction recovery outcomes. And that just like pissed me off. And I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go do it, and I'm going to publish it.
So brilliant. And I'm so excited to have you here to tell us more about it.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, what has your research found to be the main determining factor in what you saw the difference being due to this plant-based diet as opposed
So
to other? Yeah.
That's a really great question. And in fact, there isn't one singular thing that is the major driving force in terms of beneficial outcomes. So the study that we ran was a controlled trial, and it was done on a population of individuals within the treatment center setting. So it was done at a recovery called Infinite Recovery, a recovery center called Infinite Recovery in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
We pitched the opportunity to be a part of the study to individuals after 48 hours leaving detox. So they left the detox, they spent 48 hours outside of detox, and then they had the opportunity to hear about the study. There was a video that pitched the opportunity and what it was. And they could choose to join either the control group, which was a group that was going to be fed the diet that the recovery center already fed the individuals, which, to be fair, was actually a really good dietary pattern.
Okay.
It wasn't entirely plant-based. It wasn't completely devoid of processed foods, but it did have a high amount of fruits and vegetables in it, and it did have a high amount of fiber in it. Not like near the RDA, but I was like, this is actually, it's not bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you could join the treatment group, and the treatment group was given a diet that would be classified as a whole food plant-based diet, meaning yes, it's plant exclusive. But the difference between saying a vegan diet is if I was to tell you I'm vegan, you now know only what I don't eat, right? If I was to tell you that I follow a plant exclusive, whole food, plant-based diet, you now have a much better understanding that the foods that I put on my plate are plants in their whole intact form or as close to their whole intact form as possible. It's a very different diet. And we observed the individuals as they went through 3 weeks minimum of the rehab hospital setting, and then 7 additional weeks in the sober living facility. Okay. In addition to that, each group received nutrition education to match the dietary protocol that they were following. So standard ADA nutrition education and education on the benefits of plant-based nutrition.
Yeah.
And then everything else was controlled, right? So they all went to the same treatment, therapy sessions. If one group did exercise, the other group did exercise. They all had access to the same program. The only things that were different was the
Yeah.
dietary patterns and the nutrition education. So what did we see? Well, what we noticed at 10 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
we saw a statistically significant difference in three specific outcomes. The three specific outcomes that we saw the difference in happen to be three outcomes that are the greatest predictor for long-term recovery. So when we started the study, we asked ourselves, how are we going to measure recovery? And it turns out that there's not a singular definition for recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to go on kind of an investigation and figure out, well, if we're going to measure recovery, what would you use to predict success in the long term in terms
Yeah.
of a measurable outcome? And what it turns out is that the biggest predictors for long-term recovery in the early stage of recovery are threefold. They are self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
and resilience.
Mm-hmm.
These three tend to be the biggest drivers for long-term success. So those were our primary outcomes. We also measured everything else, every blood biomarker you can imagine. This was also a microbiome study. So we did fecal samples on day 1, 3, 5, 7, and week 10. We also ran every psychological evaluation you could. So the depression scale, which is called the PHQ-9, generalized anxiety disorder scale, it's called a GAD-7. We ran a self-compassion scale. We did a resilience scale. We did a self-esteem scale. We did mania, obsessive compulsive drug use,
Yeah.
everything. We
Wow.
really wanted to know what was
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
And at the end of the study, we saw statistically significant increase in self-esteem, self-compassion, and resilience within the plant-based group. The other thing I want to mention is that both groups saw benefit in every outcome across the board, which tells us two things. One, Infinite Recovery does a fantastic job. The recovery program that they have designed already does very well because every person, whether they were in the control group or the treatment group, exposed to Infinite Recovery had better outcomes. That's great. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. However, the only group that had outcomes that outperformed the other group was the plant-based group, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
The reason I find this interesting is because traditionally in recovery, there's always been the thought that if you were on a plant-exclusive diet, you might be hindering important nutrients that are valuable for recovery. So like omega-3s, like people want you to eat fish for omega-3s instead of just getting omega-3s from algae or whatever.
Yeah.
And so what we now know based on the study findings is that not only does a plant-based group have no opportunity for having a negative outcome, meaning we didn't see a single outcome in the plant-based group that was in a negative, on the negative side. In fact, they were all equal. The only group that showed benefit was the plant-based group. So that says one thing really, really clearly. A plant-based diet in no way hinders your recovery, and it suggests it might be the better diet to follow, which is great. Why? Why do we think that's happening? When you looked at the data at the end of the study, and you looked at the highest performing group compared to the lowest performing group, what you notice is that there seems to be about a 5x difference in fiber intake between the highest performers and the lowest performers. The other thing I found really interesting was that as individuals left the rehab hospital setting and went into the sober living setting, when you made that transition, you went from having your meals prepared to cooking your meals yourself. Now, it's still a controlled environment, but you are now the one who has to cook. It's part of the recovery process. You got to learn how to live your life again.
Yeah.
What we notice is that individuals in the plant-based group adhered closer to the exact diet that they were given in rehab than the control group. The control group started to return back to their old patterns of junk food, high caffeine. There seems to be something that was going on within the plant-based pattern that allowed them to feel really, really strongly bonded to this behavior.
Yeah.
And I think I can explain it, but I want to hear if you have any thoughts.
No, I mean, I am blown away by this study, and it's bringing me back to, I think it's something that's missed in the education system. We aren't taught the effects of eating plant-based, real food that is
Yes.
grown in the ground. And we grew up
Yeah,
on this standard American diet, high in carbohydrates, excess refined sugars, and we don't
yeah,
realize how that's impacting our emotions, our mental health, and our self-esteem.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the reason why we see the change in self-esteem, this change in resilience, and the change in self-compassion is kind of interesting. People want to attribute it to mechanisms within the biology and within the diet. And yes, those things are occurring. Absolutely. This wasn't a diet, this wasn't a study where we observed individual mechanisms in isolation and then speculated outcomes. This was an outcome study. What I think we're witnessing is I'll relay it to my own experience as an
Right.
example for how people can understand what I'm about to talk about.
Mhm.
I checked into treatment. I was 30 years old. I weighed over 300 pounds. I got diagnosed with advanced diabetes, advanced heart disease. I had erectile dysfunction, and they put me on a whole host of medications for psychological conditions I had no understanding of. I knew my life hurt the day I checked in. When I got diagnosed with that condition, all of a sudden, my future that already felt scary now no longer made sense. I couldn't make sense of what it was going to be like in 5 years. Were my conditions going to be worse?
Mhm.
Were my medications going to be higher dosages?
Yeah.
Were my medications going to have side effects? Were those side effects going to be painful? Was I going to be able to get up and walk around? I couldn't answer any one of those questions. And so now my future felt like a place I didn't even know if I wanted to be a part of.
Right.
Certainly didn't feel like I had any kind of esteem attached to myself. Didn't feel like I had any reason to give myself compassion. Why would I care for myself if my future isn't something I care to be a part of?
Right.
What I noticed after 2, 3 months in recovery, where I was now exposed consistently to a
Mhm.
dietary pattern that was a whole food plant based diet, I noticed some very interesting things taking place. Yes, I was losing weight. Of course I was. I was sleeping better. My energy was better. I got up on, week two, week three, month one, month two.
Mhm.
After just 1 week on the plant-based diet, my fasting blood glucose, which was starting at 390, dropped 150 points in 1 week. All right. All of a sudden, what that says to me is, hey, Adam, seems like you might have figured something out.
Mhm.
It seems like if you keep doing this thing,
Yeah.
that future you weren't so sure about might make a little bit more sense to
Mhm.
you, and it might actually feel like a safe place to be.
Mhm.
By month three, month four, month five, when the diagnoses were being reversed, when the medical doctor was saying to me, Adam, based on your latest lab results, you are no longer diabetic.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that trajectory of my life, that 5 year projection, I look down, all of a sudden, I see a future that makes sense,
Mhm.
feels safe,
Yeah.
feels secure, feels
Yeah.
hopeful, and is something I want to work every single day in order to get there. What that means is you're now noticing a rise in resilience.
Mhm.
I think that resilience isn't just mental toughness in the face of adversity. Resilience is also a sense that there's a place beyond today that you want to be a part of. It's a place that feels safe, secure, and
Mhm.
hopeful to you. It makes sense
Mhm.
so that when moments get difficult, and they will,
Yes.
you're not only able to fight, you're willing to, so that you can see the reality of that place and be present for it.
Mhm.
When we look at that same kind of experience repeated in multiple individuals in the study,
Mhm.
where by 10 weeks in, they have a resilience they didn't know they had, and it's measured.
Yeah.
They have a self esteem that they didn't know they had, and it's measured because they are now aware that this isn't something being done to them. This is something they're doing for themselves. They notice a sense of esteem which is arising, because I want people to think that self-esteem is like an internal audience. It is essentially the world that you know responding to you as if it were watching you do what you do.
Mhm.
Okay, if you were to be a person who's struggling with addiction and you were to look outside your window or you were to look at the people that you respect in your life,
Yeah.
what you'll probably notice is that it doesn't seem like any of them struggle with substance use disorder. And so what that means is, from your perception, if you were to just not use, To them, not using isn't something worthy of applause. It doesn't take effort for them to not use. It's not something they struggle with. So why should they applaud you for it? But for you, it's a very difficult thing to do. If you apply instead of saying, I want to be absent of use, instead of doing that, you actively replace your use with something that anyone you know would find valuable, which is taking care of your health. Most
Mhm.
people we know struggle with their health.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this knowledge of how to be valuable to the goings on of the world around you, that raises your self-esteem. That gives you a sense that you have a value to share within your community of shared respect. That's part of why I think we saw what we're happening. Yes, of course, there is a biological and a metabolic transition that is occurring as a result of reversing disease processes, lowering inflammation, and improving gut health. And this absolutely plays a role. It
Yes.
absolutely does. But it isn't just that.
Mhm. I think it's having the understanding that you're starting to take care of yourself by putting fresh, whole, plant-based diet inside
Yes.
of your body, as opposed to, let's talk about for a second what your diet looks like on a day in the trenches of your addiction,
Oh,
as
yeah.
opposed to what a day looks like now.
Yeah. So I used to eat about anywhere from 3 to 5,000 calories of fast food a day, which included multiple trips to McDonald's, Whataburger, Papa John's. I would drink about 15 sodas a day. Um, it was a toxic food experience because I woke up into a life that required me to just be able to survive. I didn't want to be actively present in my life
Yeah.
because my life, for many reasons, had become too painful a place to be. And, there's a British journalist named Johann Hari who wrote a phenomenal book called Lost Connections. It's probably the best book on depression, anxiety, and addiction that I've ever read in my life. And he says addiction is about not wanting to be present in your life because your life is too painful a place to be. That it's not so much this disease that we have classified it. There's something far more sophisticated, something far more human going on. And so when I got up every single day, I didn't have any reason that I felt that I wanted to actively be present in my life. And so drugs and food were a way to remove me from the opportunity of being present in my life. Um, I've shifted now into a much better way of living. When I get up every single day, there are various things that I'm so excited to be present for. I have a loving and meaningful bond with myself, both physically and emotionally, that I want to show up and be present for every single day. I have a loving and meaningful bond with people in my life that I want to show up and be present for every single day. I have a purpose that I want to share within my community of shared respect every single day. I have a bond with the natural world that I want to be present for every single day. And I have a future that makes sense, that feels safe, and that I want to work for every single day. Therefore, using is no longer attractive to me because using removes me from the opportunity to be present for the things that give me the experience of feeling meaningfully alive. That's why I'm a huge advocate of the idea that recovery isn't found in the singular pursuit of abstinence, but rather the replacement of your use with the opportunity to build a life that feels safe.
Yeah.
And so my diet today is I get up every single day and I have either, so technically I've eaten oatmeal probably 99% of my mornings for the last 12 years. I have a big bowl of oatmeal with chia seed, flax seed, pumpkin seed. I like the new Good Karma brand flax milk. It has added protein that I really like, and I use a brand Compliments protein powder in my oatmeal bowl. And if I'm not doing that, I do a big blueberry banana smoothie with pumpkin seeds, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
My lunch is usually a lentil burrito bowl style thing. I'm a huge fan of Tex-Mex flavors, so anytime I make a rice and bean bowl or a sweet potato rice and bean bowl, it always ends up being flavored with cumin and cayenne pepper and garlic and onion, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And then dinner is whatever my amazing wife makes, and she is brilliant in the kitchen. And so it's soups or some kind of awesome, you know, veggies, sweet potato, beans, rice. So my everything about my diet is very simple. Um, I know the foods that I love, not the recipes. Not I know the foods that I love, and I make sure those foods are always in my environment.
Mm.
There's a great quote that I live by. Everyone thinks that in order to be successful with change, you have to get up every single day and with grit and determination make the right choice.
Mhm.
That's exhausting. If you get up every single day and try to outcompete your current environment, you're going to end up feeling exhausted. The goal isn't how can I be willful enough to outcompete the wrong environment. The goal should be how do I make my environment look like my goals?
Mhm.
If I do that, I win.
And how do we start to do that?
So you have to get very clear with what your goals are. Who do you want to be?
Mhm.
How do you want your life to feel?
Mhm.
And then you have to be willing to understand or ask someone to explain to you what is the accurate way to go. I love a quote that says, I don't care about being right. I just want to know what's accurate. There's a lot of talk out there on social media about what foods are good and what foods are bad, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And there's a lot of people out there telling you that nutrition research doesn't really know that we don't really know a lot. That is fundamentally untrue. We know a great deal. The great thing about nutrition researchers is we also recognize we don't know everything. And we're willing to say, hey, to the best of our knowledge, this seems to be a great direction to go. You can understand really quickly whether someone wants to sell you something or whether they actually are an expert in what they're talking about.
Mhm.
Salesmen love to use words like best, must, always. An expert in a topic will always use words like suggests, seems,
Mhm.
to the best of our knowledge.
Mhm.
Those, they give you a sense that there's a limit to their knowledge and that they're basing their knowledge on data and research.
Yeah.
So what do you want your life to look like? How is the best way for you to start going there? And then who can I use as a support system to judge my efforts against and say, does this system seem to be working for me? Or can I adjust it in any way?
Mhm. I mean, for anyone listening who's experiencing anxiety, depression, who's overweight, who has addiction, look at Adam's story. You are a shining example of someone who has really taken such a unique and healthy and wholesome route to healing yourself from the inside out. And so I think this
Thank
is
you.
so incredible to listen to because so many of us in this day and age are looking for a quick fix, overnight
Mm-hmm.
success, instant gratification. I want to lose 20 pounds by next week. And that's just not the reality. But it's been incredible to hear you say, I felt a difference and noticed change in just 1 week of being
Yeah.
on a plant based diet. So, talk to
Yeah.
us about some of the things you noticed and some of the feelings you started to have just after 1 week. I keep hearing the word safety, like I felt safe again.
Yeah. That's a big one too. When I started, I had no idea if this was going to work out. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know if I was ever going to figure out what I was doing. I was very scared and I was concerned and I was worried. And so I think whenever someone is about to take on an effort like changing their life, changing their health, making a radical shift in how they move through the world, that's a courageous act. So that in and of itself is worthy of applause. What you want to do is you want to say, you want to be open minded, with your eyes open, your ears open, your heart open, your spirit open. You want to listen to the world. And when you hear a message that resonates with you, I'm not here to tell anybody what is the right thing for them to do. I'm saying that this is a valuable way to go if you choose to. If you hear a message that resonates with you, and you say, this is the direction I want to go, at that point, you have to put the blinders on. You have to close those eyes, close those ears, and just start walking down the path. Make it simple, make it obvious, make it repeatable, and give yourself permission to say, I'm not in this for the long term. I want to do this for long enough for my body to demonstrate what it's capable of. And at the end of that time, you now have informed choice.
Mhm.
You now know the value that exists if you keep going down that road. Do you want to keep going or not?
Yeah.
Run that short term experiment. Give yourself the opportunity to do it. Everything is going to require micro adjustments.
Mhm.
There's a great analogy for this. I like to say this. In 1969, we had the Apollo mission to the moon. So what that means is we took human beings and we trained them to be astronauts, and then we put them into a rocket ship and we fired them into space. And they landed that rocket ship safely on the moon, and they got out and they walked on the moon. It's just one of the most extraordinary human feats.
Yeah.
It also was incredibly dangerous. So in order to do something like that, they must have known what to do and where to go. Lauren, I'm going to ask you a question. Do
Let's
you
go.
know what percentage of the flight time they were actually on course to the moon?
I don't.
2%.
Wow.
They were on course only 2% of the time. Now, if you were to look at that from an objective perspective, just look at the numbers, look at the data, and say, wow, what an absolute failure of a flight path. They were going the wrong direction 98% of the
Yeah.
time. It must have just been sheer luck that they got
Right.
there. But if you were to pause and consider from a
Mhm.
subjective point of view what was actually taking place, they spent 98% of the time course correcting. They
Mm.
spent 98% of the time figuring out
Mhm.
how they were going to get to where they wanted to go safely.
But they had
That
their
is,
destination in mind. They knew their
they
destination.
knew where they wanted to go. They
So,
knew the
yeah.
destination. They didn't
Yeah.
know exactly how to get there, and they
Yeah.
were okay with that. They said,
Mhm.
we're going to make every adjustment we need until we get there safely. Every single person who's on a journey
Yeah.
of self-discovery, of rediscovery,
Mhm.
is an explorer on a mission.
Mhm.
It's going to require those course corrections.
Yeah.
And believe me, once you get there, that flight path the next time is much easier. And eventually, that flight path is nothing but habit. You know
Mhm.
exactly what to do, where to go, and you love doing it.
Mhm. Often, I think the biggest part is just starting the mission.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, the analysis paralysis thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, well, what if I don't do it right? Well, then you learn.
Yeah.
Great, you know?
Then you can know how to pivot. You know what's not going to work
Exactly.
once you actually start. Otherwise, you won't get that information.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I know before we started our call, I was telling you I just took physiological psychology, and I want to give our listeners a little bit of insight into the neuroscience behind addiction. And I want to
Sure.
talk about dopamine and its role in
Please.
addiction.
Yes.
So, like, what's happening in the brain
Okay.
during an addictive behavior, and how can we stimulate dopamine receptors through healthier habits?
So this is great. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Yeah.
So dopamine is a phenomenal neurotransmitter. Dopamine is a very unique reward chemical.
Mhm.
It is a pleasure chemical, but it's not like every other pleasure chemical because this is a reward pleasure chemical, meaning that the euphoric experience of pleasure that you get from dopamine is a signal to your psychology that suggests that whatever you have just done has statistically increased your likelihood of survival. It is rewarding your survival outcomes. That's why we like it. That's why we go towards it.
Yeah.
Survival and reproduction is the most primal driver for behavior, right? How do I get to tomorrow? That's what your survival is thinking about. How do I get to tomorrow? Now you have a range of experiencing pleasure that is appropriate for your psychology, meaning that those things that you do that are representative of your natural history and your natural behavior will likely release a pleasure experience that is just good enough that you'll want to do it again when you need it, but
Mhm.
not so good that you'll do it repeatedly, even if it's risking your life. Now, what has happened over the course of time is that we have started to mess with the environment.
Mhm.
We've started to introduce into the environment what we'll call supernormal stimuli, meaning they are either behaviors or they are things that you can do that trigger a dopamine response that goes way outside of that appropriate range.
Mhm.
And as it goes outside of this appropriate range, what happens is you get an unbelievable feeling of success. It must be right. How could it be wrong? This is the exact thing I've been looking for. Every single instinct in me is trying to get the most amount of pleasure for the least amount of pain and the least amount of energy. I just hit the absolute gold mine, right?
Mhm.
But what happens is your dopamine receptors defend themselves against this intense stimulus. They dull those receptors until what was once an intense rush of dopamine now occurs within the appropriate range. And you do this over and over and over again, and you go, hang on a second, this behavior is really not good for my long-term health.
Mhm.
Whether it's junk food, drugs, whatever it is, this is not going well. I need to go that direction instead of that direction.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, I'm going to start eating healthy, or I'm going to start doing this instead of that. And when you do, when you go back to choices that are appropriate to your psychology, but you've habituated to supernormal stimuli, this choice now feels wrong because it registers in a pleasure range that doesn't feel successful. This is what Dr. Doug Lisle, he's an evolutionary psychologist, calls the pleasure trap. This is where you have habituated to a supernormal environment. And now when you go back to an appropriate environment, every instinct in you is still trying to get the most amount of pleasure for the least amount of pain and the least amount of energy. And now doing the wrong thing feels incredibly right, and doing the right thing feels incredibly wrong. And you think it's your fault. You think, well, I don't get it. I've seen other people change their life. They get healthy. I tried and I couldn't do it. I must be the failure here. It must be a lacking in my willpower. It must be a lacking in discipline. It's not what's occurring. What is occurring is the appropriate psychological and biological response to the wrong environment. So I'll explain it like this. Let's say you would go outside at night and you were to leave your porch light on. What you'd notice is that there are moths and they're attracted to the light. And the reason why they're attracted to the light is because they are designed by nature to use bright lights in the sky, in fact, celestial objects, for navigation and survival. It's how they know what to do in order to survive and reproduce. But when the brightest light in the sky is now no longer the stars, and the brightest light in the sky is now your porch light, those survival instincts are misguided, they are confused. The moth hits that light, it flutters down, hits it again, hits again, hits again, and eventually it dies. And if you were to be outside on the porch watching it, you go, what the heck is that about? Why in the world did that moth keep hitting the light? There must have been something wrong with its psychology. That must have been its psychology or biology gone wrong. Because not only did I witness that moth do it, why would these other moths that just saw that moth do that, the same thing, why would they follow suit? Why would they all continue to do this? There's something wrong with this generation of moths. Something has gone wrong. But if you were to actually pause and consider from the perspective of the moth, what's actually occurring is that that animal is thinking and feeling like it's doing the exact right thing by messing with the environment, by introducing a supernormal stimulus, a stimulus that was never supposed to be there, a stimulus that was never supposed to exist. That animal will now always run the threat of making poor decisions, potentially even fatal ones, all the while thinking and feeling it's being incredibly successful. That's useful. Now we have a solution here. Now what we can do is we can look back and we can observe our behavior and say, is this repetitive compulsive behavior towards junk food, towards drugs, is it a failure of psychology? Is it biology or psychology gone wrong? Or is it actually biology and psychology gone right within environments gone terribly wrong? It is absolutely the latter. When the environment is wrong, it is very difficult for you to make instinctual decisions that lead you towards success. Because your survival instincts don't care about you getting to 90. They only care about you surviving to tomorrow. If you want to do well, if you want to make it to 90, if you want to be happy and healthy, it requires a very specific and appropriate strategy. You have to shift your environment back to what is more representative of your natural history and your natural behavior. That includes a caloric environment that looks enough like what we have survived on through our evolutionary story, which is mostly whole food, whole plant foods. Yes, of course, we never were without animal products, but anyone who says we were hunter-gatherers doesn't understand anthropology. We were gatherer-hunters. That's exactly what was happening. Most tribes survived by the efforts of women, and they celebrated the 10% efforts of men whenever they got a big kill. It was mostly the women gatherers that helped every one of these cultures survive. You also have to shift the rest of your environment. You have to make your social environment look enough like the life you want. It is very exhausting to consistently explain yourself to other people. Why are you doing that? Why are you eating like that? Why are you exercising all the time? Friends around you don't have to do life just like you, but they have to do it enough like you so that when you're around them, they offer you the opportunity to do life how you would like just by being in their presence, and you do the same for them. The other thing is to get back into a natural rhythm with nature. We are so disconnected from the natural rhythm of nature. Every species of animal on this planet exists within a rhythm of nature. We
Mhm.
rise and fall with the sun
Mhm.
and the moon.
Yeah.
We rise and fall given signals to us by the natural light,
Mhm.
but we're separated from natural light. We
Mhm.
have this artificial blue light around us all the time that stimulates cortisol. We get
Yeah.
up when we're told to for work, so we have alarms that wake us up. That's not a natural waking process. And we wake up with just enough time to go grab coffee and get to work. There's no transition into the wake from asleep into being awake. There's no natural rhythm to anything.
Mhm.
So reorganize your environment to be suited to your natural flow of stress and
Mhm.
relaxation.
Mhm.
My wife is a phenomenal naturopathic doctor. Her name's Dr. Laura Gouge, and one of the things she's an expert in is circadian rhythms and also neuroatypical brains and mast cell activation syndrome. And so I've learned a lot from her. One of the things we've done is we've removed blue light from our house. They're not cheap, they're incandescent bulbs. They have the same color temperature as sunrise and sunset.
Mhm.
We do the best we can every single day to get up and spend enough time outdoors first before we do anything. Before we even
Mhm.
have our coffee, we just go sit outside.
Yeah.
We have a transition period from the end of the workday into our evening time. These transitions are so valuable. So there's so much that you can do that can really get you back to what it means to feel like the world makes sense.
Mhm.
And if you are believing that you're broken, if you believe that what you're struggling with is a failure of you, I want you to take that thought right now and I want you to crush it in your hand and then I want you to throw it in the garbage where it belongs because the issues that you are struggling with make sense.
Mhm.
You make sense. You are not a failure of biology or psychology, and your biology and psychology is not failing you.
Mhm.
More than likely, the environment that you found yourself in, maybe at no fault of your own, is not conducive to the long term goings on of your well being.
Mhm.
And so now it is your responsibility to figure out, well, what would I like it to be?
Mhm.
And who can help me figure out how to make it look enough like that so that I can move towards success?
Mhm. Thank you, Adam. So many incredible tips. I
Yeah,
love the quote that says, your landscape is your mindscape. And I think it is so important to pay attention to the environment that is surrounding you,
yeah,
the people, the places, the things, the food you're putting inside you, the way you're thinking, the sleep you're getting. All of these things come together to make you
yeah.
whole. And you can start to redesign that in any moment. And Adam has given so many incredible tips to do
Well,
so.
thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, as we begin to wrap up, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Yes, absolutely. So, and I think it's very fitting today. And I apologize if I don't make it through what I'm about to say without crying. But one of the things about going into recovery is you get to learn a lot of amazing things. You get to do a lot of amazing things, and you get to be a part of a lot of amazing things. But unfortunately, long-term recovery can cost a lot because not all the friends that you love make it out with you. Um, I have lost six very, very dear friends since getting into recovery 12 years ago. Um, and I, I don't take my life lightly. I hold these people in my heart every day. Um, but I like to end every talk that I give with a quote from one of my dearest friends. His name was David Clark. Um, and I remember David used to say, we all know the saying that if you really want to be happy, you should just live like it's the last day of your life. We've all heard this quote. David said, I really don't like that quote at all. Because if you were to actually follow that advice, you wouldn't do many of the things that are required of you in order to have a great long life. You maybe wouldn't eat very well. Maybe you wouldn't go to work. Maybe you wouldn't clean your house or do your laundry. David used to say, if you really want to be happy, you should treat everyone you meet as if they're living the last day of their life. And it's not always an easy thing to do, but my goodness, when you do it,
Yeah.
you notice you have so much more willingness to give people permission to be who they are without any excuse, without any need for them to explain or reason for them being who they are and how they are and why they are.
Mm.
You give them permission to be in your life because 1 minute later they might not be. And what a disservice it is to you and to anyone else
Mhm.
if you don't give someone the opportunity to be fully themselves, whether you agree with them or not,
Yeah.
and witness it.
I mean, I think we're all here to live in our full expression, and many
Mhm.
people don't feel safe or confident enough to do so, and to be able to give someone that space is so meaningful.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's it's I think I don't think I've ever had a mantra that I agree with more than that
Yeah.
one. So
Yeah.
yeah, for David today.
Thank you for David. I heard something and it was treat everyone as if they are the one. And it's
Hmm.
a bit similar to that, to treat it as
Yeah,
if it's their last day.
yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, so I have a website, adamsud.com. You can follow my social media. It's plant-based addict. So I have a Instagram account, plant-based addict. I do have TikTok, but I don't really post on it. So Instagram and my website, adamsud.com are the two places I would go to.
Wonderful, Adam. We'll see you there. Thank you.